Did you know that Ethiopia is one of Africa's most culturally diverse countries, home to over 80 ethnic groups and more than 100 languages? This diversity plays a vital role in shaping Ethiopia's social fabric and political landscape. In this debut session of Ethiopia in Focus, I will be speaking with Dr. Eyob Tekalign, State Minister of Finance. Dr. Eyob also serves as a member of the National Macroeconomic Committee and is an executive member of the governing Prosperity Party. Together, we'll explore Ethiopia's recent challenges and achievements as Dr. Eyob provides historical and political context to better understand the challenges confronting the current administration and the efforts being made to address them. Navigating challenges and fulfilling commitments, a path for generational progress. Welcome to this conversation with Dr. Eyob Tekalign, and in Ethiopia in Focus conversation. Dr. Eyob, welcome.
Thank you.
Just to share with you, in my perspective, I feel like the path over the past 6 years can be, in a way, defined as a sleeping giant waking up. And as we all know, probably a sleeping giant does not wake up like a ballerina in a dainty way. There's bound to be a lot of moving, there's bound to be a lot of shaking, and as a result of that, there's many positive consequences and some rough patches as a result of that awakening. And just leading up to the 5th year anniversary of the formation of the ruling party, Prosperity Party, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had issued a national statement which covered a lot of issues with regards to the reforms that have been undertaken in the past 6 years. And just to quote from his statement, quote unquote, "The reforms will heal the fractures of the past, redeem the present, and guide Ethiopia's journey into the future." So just to start us on our conversation, what did he mean by that? And looking at 2018 as the critical point in time for Ethiopia's modern history, where it has been a turning page, maybe if you could give us a little bit of context to some of the reforms that he mentions in the statement, as well as all the others that we've undertaken.
Thank you, Belene. I like your analogy of the elephant awakening, but also the point about 2018 being a turning point in Ethiopian history. But I think it might be useful to review a little bit of Ethiopia's past to understand how significant 2018 is. You know, there is a lot of controversy around the state formation in Ethiopia. And depending on where you stand, in fact, even on the meaning of Ethiopianness, Ethiopiaዊነት. For some, the focus is on civic virtues of Ethiopian nationalism, citizenship, and the argument is the state formation process has created a common space for all Ethiopians, akin to countries like China and India, so we have a unified one state. And others, on the other hand, contend that actually the state is an empire that was built by subjecting part of its citizens through coercion, forceful annexation. So in a way, they focus on ethnicity and regional allegiance. A tale of two states, if you like. Now, controversies aside, I think there is no question that the state formation in Ethiopia is an incomplete project. And I like one scholar who put it as, he said, the current differences, dispensations, are usually fought out as battles over historical interpretations, which proves the weight of Ethiopia's past and its political inconclusiveness. So all to say, here we have now a state that's not fully formed, a public that does not really agree on the notion of the state structure and so on. So a very, very difficult history we have. And probably that is why a meaningful progress has been difficult. Generation after generation have tried to succeed in transforming the country. There is this quest for progress, for development, for prosperity, but had been elusive. Why? You see, when you ask that why, probably a political economic perspective could give you a very good context because you asked for context. So bear with me. Let me just quickly walk you through history. Look at the imperial period. You know, the economic basis of the imperial period was based on tribute and surplus labor, which essentially means an exploitation of the larger mass. Land was owned by more than 1% of the elite, about 90% of the land masses, you know. And then the economic and political institutions that were built were both extractive and exclusive. So we had foundational deficiencies when we formed the state. So, you know, this was not a sustainable political economy. So essentially, it led to overthrow of the imperial regime. And now when you look at the next two republics, the Dergs and EPRDFs, I think the story is by and large similar. Of course, the Derg had this historic land to the tiller decree, which changed that imperial regime inefficiency and exploitation. But the Derg was not able to create a viable economic program to transform the economy, the country at large. You know, the focus was on changing the means of production to the state, rather than creating economic efficiency and private sector dynamism. Besides, the Derg also ignored group grievances. So the political economy aspect, again, was ignored. So another unsuccessful effort by a generation to transform the economy. And come to the Third Republic, you know, the EPRDF. One could say, you know, some say the EPRDF took a quote-unquote radical approach in trying to create a political settlement in Ethiopia by redefining the whole notion of ethnicity, nationalism, and state formation by reconfiguring the state at ethnic federal state, right? So the focus was on addressing diversity, giving some autonomy to ethnic groups, you know, a good point in and of itself. But the challenge is the PRF regime focused on that diversity too much, which weakened the national unity, the sense of collective Ethiopian identity. And besides...
What do you mean? Can you maybe elaborate? What does it mean to focus a little bit too much on diversity? Because there's...
accentuating our differences. That difference is important. You should celebrate that diversity. But the whole political program should not be based on highlighting our differences, focusing on that, creating serious unrest and disagreement among the Ethiopian public.
Can we say that essentially when we're coming to that next chapter by 2018, leading up to 2018, what precipitated a lot of these reforms can be rooted in this accentuating these differences? Could we say that?
Yes, absolutely.
Instead of having a more unified national narrative, we're looking at different people or different sections of society having these competing narratives rather.
Exactly, very competing narratives. There is this historical cleavage, right? We had foundational issues already. And when you build on that, it actually created serious controversy around the whole nation of the Ethiopian project. And then there is also a sense of unfairness in how the economics and the politics was managed. A certain group benefiting at the expense of the larger group. So as this grievance intensified, you saw coming up 2018, significant opposition to the government, expression of grievance, a call for a change from all walks of life. Ethiopians from south, north, center said enough is enough. And then came 2018, that change. So when the change leadership took power, essentially it inherited a country whose state formation is incomplete, that has serious political economic issues, and a public that is forced to live yesterday, build on historical grievances, rather than collectively forging a better future. And that is why, to end here, 2018 is such a critical time because it, in a way, fundamentally changed this. With sweeping social, economic, political reforms. Now you have an agenda to once and for all correct those foundational deficiencies. But in terms of content planning, in terms of substance, in terms of change in direction, because here you're promising an inclusive political, social, and economic progress for all Ethiopians. So it's profound. That is how 2018 came into being within that context.
And I think the reason that I ask you for context is I sense that there's a misreading of the past 6 years by different sections of an international community perhaps. And it's anchored in not really understanding the trajectory that Ethiopia has come across, as you've rightly shared it as well, but also what were the key elements leading up to 2018 changes. And like you said, because the state formation was not complete, there were issues and questions of inclusivity. Again, when you're talking about diversity versus what is being magnified, using it and catalyzing it for unity versus using it for divisiveness, all of these have precipitated these changes that we've come across. But post 2018, again, why context is important is the speed and pace at which we're going. And through that process, this is an infant that is starting to grow, experimenting with democracy. Or exploring democracy and exploring different components of what would make a cohesive state. Now that we've come to 2018, you've taken us from that context to where we're 2018. What had transpired after that? What were some of the reforms that came as a result of this turning page?
Look, the reforms are sweeping and came, across every spectrum. Now, if you look at the political reform, for instance, the political reform is so deep. It's a new political culture is in the making. Maybe I could mention a couple of points here on the political reform, but one profound one for me is the establishment of the Prosperity Party. It's a watershed plan. It's so consequential. Prosperity Party is changing the political narrative, the political culture in Ethiopia by, for the first time, introducing an inclusive political agenda. They say Prosperity Party is inclusive, but I think it's an understatement. The party boasts membership across all ethnic, political, and cultural groups.
More than 15 million members, as Prime Minister
Abiy
just
and almost
stated recently.
all ethnic groups represented. In a country where the focus is on creating political class, pastoralist, agriculturalist, center, periphery, main, subordinate, if you like. This no longer is the case under prosperity because it gave a chance for every Ethiopian, west, east, south, north, center, to be part of the political process, to have a sense of inclusion, a sense of agency, to sit on the driver's seat, to decide on the fate of the nation. It's powerful. It's shattered that wall of division, that parties have created for decades. As Prime Minister Abiy was saying, Ethiopian political parties have drawn largely from foreign ideologies, and they focused on schisms. They thrive on accentuating minor differences and destroying their opponents. But look at what Prosperity Party is doing. It's changing even the vocabulary of politics. You're no longer an opponent, an enemy, but a competitive party. Look how major political party leaders are now part of government. They govern, they lead the country,
And it's important to highlight inclusivity, which you started. Maybe you could extrapolate a little bit in terms of what you mean by inclusivity from periphery to the center. Who was at the periphery before and who came to the center now?
The fate of this country was decided by only limited group of Ethiopians. If you look at how a PRDF was structured, for instance, there is a first class, TPLF or the dominant force, and then there are three other parties that form the coalition. But the rest of the parties, the Somalis, Benishangul, the Afar, and so on, were called
Allies.
Allied
parties.
Subordinate is not the right word, allies, but they see it as second level political class. Even on a major issues that requires collective decision, they can't vote, they can't say. At times they might observe. What Prosperity Party did was bring everyone, in the room on the decision table, and look how it has strengthened the party and the nation. We have a party leadership now from Somali. The sense of Ethiopianness, the sense of being included is such a powerful thing. It's the most peaceful region in Ethiopia, and not only for Ethiopian Somalis, but actually for the larger Somali population. It gave, in decades, they say, a sense of freedom, a sense of movement, a sense of being part of a big thing. But on that opposition thing, I want to tell you what it means for average Ethiopians. It means a national development goal is a collective enterprise. That's what that tells you, right? It's not about one party. It's about all the other parties.
And this is reflected in opposition members or competing members being present in the Council of Ministers as well.
Exactly, deciding, some leading the education agenda, the most important sector for the country's transformation. And a new vocabulary, and I love this, fraternity, sisterhood, brotherhood. Do you understand what it means? It means you're not just a comrade, huh? You're not just a colleague. You are my sister and I'm your brother. That means we are in it together. This is our nation. This is our country. Such a departure we see in our politics that gives you confidence, now a potential to achieve a lasting political settlement, an inclusive political settlement, and agree on this nationhood, Ethiopianness, collective identity in the making. That imagine, nationality is an imagined political exercise, right? So you should imagine that you are part of it. When we say Ethiopia, this nation, this country, unless everyone in the nation feels part of it, you cannot really have a lasting political settlement. And that is why I'm confident this time around with this change, we are going to achieve that.
So leading to my second question, Dr. Eyob, you would agree that we're living in uncertain times globally. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And I think 2018 marked a new chapter in Ethiopia's modern history. And globally, what ensued after 2018 has affected the entire world. Number one being the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and what it meant for a lot of economies. The second one being the geopolitical rivalries that we're seeing still manifesting to this day as well, and what would mean for economic global shocks that inadvertently affect our economy as well and put other stressors. So with this as a backdrop, what would you say that new challenges that have emerged since 2018, and in what ways is the administration tackling these challenges?
Look, we've seen challenge after challenge, right? I mean, they came in twos, in threes, in fours, in five the last 5-6 years. Whether it's a 25-year worst drought, COVID-19 pandemic, locust invasion, domestic instability, and then the global slowdown because of Russia-Ukraine war, and you gave a very good context about the global challenge. But how did we overcome these challenges is the question. I think one important thing is we've managed to build a resilient economy through the economic reform that we implemented. First, second iteration of economic reform. The leadership, the change leadership inherited an economy on the brink of complete collapse. macroeconomic imbalances, high public debt, stubborn inflation, significant public wastage, a very weakened private sector, and disgruntled public because of that sense of unfairness, economic inequality, and so on.
Not only a weakened private sector, but a private sector that is looked at in a very negative light as well.
Absolutely. You know, the whole idea of coalition building during the PRF regime, you know, the way the party looked at it was that the private sector is not really necessarily part of the coalition, because the argument is the private sector is rent seeker. But look, you have more than half of the public outside that coalition, and how can you achieve meaningful economic progress? So what this reform did was, one, rebalance the role of the private sector and the public sector, brought the private sector as an engine of economic growth, you know, is about 70% of bank loans now going to the private sector as opposed to going to the public sector before the reform. But also laid a strong foundation for sustainable economic growth, you know, correcting on the past mistake of focusing only on one or two sectors as source of growth. The source of growth was expanded. You know, we invested in agriculture, manufacturing, mining, tourism, digital economy, and that started to pay off. Look at the agriculture success, for instance. We've managed to increase crop production by 200 million quintals. I mean, can you imagine the significance of this? It's huge. And now Ethiopia is the #1 wheat producer in Africa. Manufacturing, we've increased our productive capacity, the utilization of productive capacity by 10 percentage points. We still need to do more, but this is quite significant. Mining, this notion of inclusive mining has changed the perception about mining. We modernized artisanal mining, but also attracted significant investment in high-scale mining tourism. I mean, you know this very well, Belania. I know you lead these projects. See how the tourism agenda became at the forefront. It looked as if it was just a wishful thinking when Prime Minister Abiy talked repeatedly about Ethiopia's tourism potential, developing tourism destinations. Let's see how Ethiopia has now become an important tourism and conference destination. This quarter, you know, the quarter that we've just concluded, events in Ethiopia, 25 more events were organized in Ethiopia compared to the same period last year. And digitization, I like this agenda. We promised that Ethiopia would go digital, and Ethiopia has actually gone digital now. You know, the amount of digital transaction we are conducting now is 9.7 trillion. It used to be about just 45 billion birr or so. And digital saving, digital credit, and digitization, not just a sector in and of itself, but enabling other sectors, trade, agriculture, manufacturing. Such a profound achievement in all economic sectors. That gives you confidence that the economy is on the right track.
You would say these are the markers of resilience that you were talking about, because we're talking about at the backdrop of all of these global challenges, as well as political contestations that we're facing internally. These are the markers of the resilience. What would that formula be for having birthed such kind of a resilience?
I think the government stayed on track. For one thing, because we've foreseen the need for economic reform, we've managed to stay resilient. Because we've understood the political challenge, when different challenge also came internally.
That's what I mean by the political contestations?
Exactly. The historical baggage I talked about. We still feel the weight of that. Unfortunately, brothers have killed each other in this country the last 5 years for tribal, nonsensical, historical grievances of a sort. It's sad. But there is also a silver lining here. As I look at the challenge we went through and what we've managed to achieve in that political contestation, I feel we're laying a strong foundation for a sustainable peace for decades to come. In fact, let me use the analogy of there is this disease called the smallpox, right? Once you get it over with, for good. It no longer comes back. So I feel all these...
The sleeping giant has contracted smallpox.
Exactly, that's contracted smallpox. It's getting it over with, and we move forward on the path to prosperity.
Maybe I want you to touch a little bit upon the factors or the formula for this resilience. At one point in conversations that we've had, you've also remarked about leadership. You talked about continuity. There's also an introduction of new ways of doing things, and one of these is, consistent follow-up and executing projects in a different form than it used to be done before. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on these formulas for resilience.
Exactly. Post 2018, I think under the leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, Ethiopians have imagined something big. They've dared to dream. And that completely changed the culture of economic management, project execution, planning, and delivery. Look at how projects were devised and implemented. The mantra is not just start to finish, but start after completing. In your mind, you've seen it through. When you start something, you'll push through the execution to its logical end. And that is the new culture that came. Look at the city...
the corridor development.
The corridor development, it's not just in Addis, but generally, the Prime Minister's imagination is cities should be green, livable, smart, and fiscally sustainable. And we're seeing the first phase of this in Addis Ababa, the capital, which through its name is blossoming. I was looking at the Economic Intelligence Unit's report just yesterday. You know what they are projecting? At 10.5% cumulative GDP growth, Addis Ababa will be the highest GDP growth registering city in Africa by 2035. In fact, they say it will jump 6 ranks and become the 6th largest city by 2035. Of course, you and I would feel it's a very conservative projection, but it tells you though, they rank all cities and see that Addis Ababa actually is becoming one of the biggest and thriving cities in Ethiopia. So this is a vision of a leader that is building a country. The Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is a statesman for me. UAE had Sheikh Khalif, Singapore had Lee. You can go on. Countries had leader that thought through a national transformation project, led consistently, persistently, and carries through that vision. I think when history looks back on how Ethiopia is being managed post-2018, it will register that there was a statesman that saw, that dreamed big for the country, rallied the whole nation behind, led with strict discipline, leadership, consistent follow-up, and more importantly, with an agenda that mobilized the entire nation. Because the National Development Goal is a collective enterprise. Look at the green legacy, We talk about 40 billion seedlings being planted. This is impossible unless you mobilize the entire public behind this vision. So, to your point, the success of this reform is persistence, perseverance, the right kind of idea, vision, but also with strict discipline of execution.
Dr. Eyob, in the 5th year anniversary of the formation of Prosperity Party, on the program that just had taken place on Saturday, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed was talking about the naming of the party itself, where prosperity is not just a name for a party, he had said specifically. What it actually defines is an aspiration for the nation. So starting from this point, what is the government's political, economic, and social commitment to the people? If prosperity is an aspiration, maybe you can extrapolate a little bit on that.
Yolande, the government's commitment is to respond to this generational aspiration. I told you how the quest for prosperity, for nation building has been elusive in Ethiopia. The commitment is to deliver this home and to do it within one generation, in the next 2-3 decades. I hope you and I would, live long enough. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll get at least 30 more years and see this through and tell back the history of Ethiopia's transformation. Now, the commitment by the government, let me just give you a political, social, and economic commitment briefly, if you allow me. On the political side, the commitment is to realize a lasting political settlement and create a unified, cohesive country where there is social cohesion, inclusive nation building, and a collective drive for prosperity. In a way, correct those foundational deficiencies which we've talked about by building an inclusive nation and state. On the economic front, the promise is to realize a comprehensive socio-economic progress. Prosperity is an aspiration. We don't look at prosperity as just an economic phenomenon. It's a multidimensional process which requires a reorientation and reorganization of the whole social and economic systems. I like the word Amartya Sen, a known economist and philosopher uses, substantive freedom. You have political rights, economic opportunities, social opportunities, access to education, to health is as equally important as political rights and economic opportunities. So some people think, for instance, political rights is a luxury. That's not how prosperity views substantive freedom, full-fledged prosperity. It's a package. Everyone in Ethiopia should be able to exercise his or her God-given capacity, unleash that capacity, fulfill his or her dreams, should have the space to thrive, to grow, to prosper. So the promise of prosperity is not just measured in terms of economic achievement. It's measured in that political liberty, in equal and fair social opportunity for all. So in a way, it's a response to that generational aspiration, and as Prime Minister Abiy rightly put it, I think it's a generational call to respond for generational aspiration. So you and I, this generation, I think there is a call for all of us to get this right this time around. To not squander this historic opportunity to once and for all set this country on a sustainable path and achieve meaningful transformation. And socially, this is also important, the moral values. Because of excessive materialism, we've lost a moral compass. There's a generation that lost its moral compass. We need to reorient that generation and also make sure the next generation does not fall into that trap. That is why this focus on morality, civic education, starting from the lower grade of voluntarism has become a new norm. Because if you want to create a prosperous and harmonious society, these virtues are important. A handshake should be a handshake, Bilani. We should keep our words. Businesses should keep their businesses, should keep proper record of their businesses, and also the sense of hard work. You should not be working hard when somebody is watching behind you, watching you. It should be a virtue that is inbuilt. And look what is happening. You see kids working day and night. I often go to Garda, sit on the borders, it's inspiring to see
the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam.
The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, exactly. Young girls and boys working through day and shift night, and young girls and boys here in Addis building the city anew. So that is an important promise in that prosperity project.
But earlier when we were talking about inherited challenges, you had mentioned economic factors related to that debt. And one of the recurring themes in Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's address to the nation always is this aspect of not transferring debt to future generations. And this is a generational agenda. Can you say a little bit more about that with reference to, what are these commitments and what is it anchored in?
The way Prime Minister Abiy views the nexus between yesterday, today, and tomorrow is so inspiring. He sees today as a time for us to build a better future, but learning from past mistakes, but also owning some of the challenges and correcting them, including the national debt is one thing, for instance. Look how we have more than halved the external debt to GDP ratio. It was about 30% in 2018. It's just only 13% now. But it's not just an external debt. This historical baggage, the way and significant wastage in public spending, Look at the mismanagement of public resources, METEC, even the Grand Barrels has done project, a lot of wastages. Our SOEs were all in debt, even Ethio Telecom. Do you know that the board of Ethio Telecom, the creditors to Ethio Telecom, the main vendors, were not even willing to talk to the board members, let alone to the management. What this leadership has accomplished by reforming these SOEs, not just only creating a very profitable ventures, but bringing them together by establishing a sovereign wealth fund. So you don't only pay the debt that the previous generation had accumulated, but by working hard today, you actually create asset, wealth for the next generation. See that is how he views the connection between yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Is such a powerful thinking. And that drove everything we did, from reducing debt to creating institutions. It's very important that we talk about how we build institutions. There is a strong focus on institution building. Not just dismantle them and build them anew, but as needed, reform them, strengthen them. Look at our defense and security institutions.
The security sector is one area that I was going to share with you as well.
Look at this, how we've managed to build a strong security posture, because we've created strong institutions and modernized them, creating domestic capability in manufacturing defense arsenals, but also the human resource of these institutions. The focus is, these are not
the
institutions of prosperity.
Technology as well.
It's technology as well, exactly. And these are not institutions that Prosperity Party owns. These are institutions of the Ethiopian people. The party will come and go, but you have to create an Ethiopian institution that lasts for generations to come. So that generational view is what is giving us confidence that what we aspire to do tomorrow is quite feasible.
So Dr. Eyob, as we're wrapping up, what I want you to reflect on is, we're in the process of state formation. There's a lot of baggage that we have accumulated, and that baggage has been manifesting itself in so many forms over the past 6 years. There are lofty goals, the vision of inclusivity. There are tangible results in terms of, securing these reflections of inclusivity. There's prosperity goals as well. What are the overarching, areas where they are anchored in? How are we anchoring these things? Is this in the homegrown economic reform agenda? Is it in the 10-year development perspective? Where do we anchor all of these aspirations and goals?
I think we do use different kind of plannings, as you said. We have an economic reform agenda, a 10-year plan, but the grand project is that vision we've set for ourselves. The big dream. A dream to transform this nation. A dream to achieve prosperity. So as we said, these are lofty goals. We're saying Ethiopia would be the top 20 biggest economy globally in the next few decades. That's what we aspire, right? We say it's going to be an African beacon of prosperity. Big aspiration. But are these goals mere wishes, or do you have strong basis to dream big is I think, an important question. If you look at what we've managed to achieve the last 5-6 years, I think it gives you confidence that we're heading where we say we're heading. Look at the economy. We've doubled our GDP, doubled our per capita GDP, increased revenue by threefold, more than half data, as I mentioned earlier. We've created a very dynamic agricultural sector, manufacturing sector, and so on. I think this gives you confidence that by just barely scratching the surface the last 5 years, we've seen a big result. The Prime Minister was saying, you can count these years in one finger, but many handful successes that we've managed to achieve. So this is anchored in the works, in the reform and planning and vision that we've set for ourselves, realistic ones and cognizant of Ethiopia's reality. Look at Madamar. Madamar draws from Ethiopia's culture and social fabrics, where issues of...
Madamar being the concept.
The concept that drove the agenda of prosperity party, the notion of solidarity, commonality,
creating synergy,
synergy, collective action. So that is why we're saying Ethiopia can be a success story. We talk often about the Asian tigers, the Singapore, the South Korean, Malaysia, and others. I think when history reviews an African success story in decades to come, I think they would find a beacon of prosperity, an example of success in Ethiopia. And this is, I'm really passionate about this, I tell you, because I could almost see it coming. And when we refer back to the spirit, when history refers back to the spirit, I think they would find out that this was a turning point. This was a time when Ethiopians, under the leadership of its statesman, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, have come together and said, let's build a nation. Let's build a nation that works for all of us. Let's pull ourselves together rather than skirmishes here and there on tribal issues, quibbling over unnecessary historic interpretations. Let's join hands and build a strong and prosperous nation. So, Belene, I'm confident, but not just confident, but I know for sure that Ethiopia will make it. And I'm so glad that we are part of this process of transforming the nation and creating a prosperous, harmonious nation that works for all Ethiopians.
So, success story in Africa is underway.
Absolutely.
In terms of disinformation, misinformation about Ethiopia, I think over the past 6 years, what we've seen with a lot of the opening up, particularly, having access to the internet as well, it has been a double-edged sword. There is, the positive side to it, which is our communities are, the digital penetration in terms of communities is pretty strong. But at the same time, it has also exposed us to a lot of misinformation and disinformation. What is that one thing that you would like to clarify related to that?
We live in a post-reality world. It's a very, very difficult world we live in. With the social media, it has become difficult to discern the truths from, the fabrication of information. It's not just a challenge in Ethiopia, it's a global challenge.
It's a global phenomenon.
Exactly. I mean, you've seen speeches made in AI as if somebody has said the thing that they've never said. And look how social, there are two worlds in Ethiopia. There is a social media world and there is the actual world. In that social media world, the country is burning. It's as if the whole nation is on fire. An incident, a small incident that happens, of course, the news, flows quickly because that social media age. And then the way it's portrayed and projected with deep fake now these days, you could have, we're talking about these issues, you could have someone putting an AI and change you to, if they like, for another journalist. And, it's a very, very complex story. So I think it's important that people understand it's a very challenging environment that we're in. And that is why
it requires more effort to understand the context, to understand the
exactly.
broader goal that you were
Don't just believe everything you hear. Let me tell you one example. My wife, I think a few weeks ago, we went to a big event. She knew I went to a big event in around Adama area, and we had to do some family things. So I told her I will be there for lunch. I'll see you. So she knows we're talking. And then as she was waiting for me, she hears the social media that says, "Oh, a major scandal has happened. There is fighting ongoing where I was." She said, "God, well, I was talking to you. If I hadn't known, if we hadn't talked, I would have assumed that was a true story." And look how what we hear is largely a fabrication. So we should verify our sources, as a public, but also as a government, we should understand this challenge and communicate more often. Be on social media, try to overcome those fabrications and tell that true story. The story being what we've talked about, that this nation is about to take off, and Ethiopians are coming together to collectively realize their generational aspiration of creating a prosperous country that works for all.
Just one last question, Dr. Eyob, before we conclude. And Ethiopia is a historic civilization. The state formation that you have given us a glimpse of shows a lot of complexity. There's a lot of potential, and we have seen a lot of the potential being unlocked over the past few years. Again, situating it within the larger continent in terms of the success story that is evolving. My personal frustration is sometimes we are narrowed down to a difficult period in our recent past. So all of these things that we have achieved, all of these transitions that we're going through, always are boiled down by a lot of actors to just that one, point in time that we have overcome as well. So, in your capacity as an executive member of Prosperity Party, as a member of the National Macroeconomic Committee, and a State Minister of Finance, what is the one thing that you would want others who are not understanding Ethiopia to take away shortly?
Look at the broader picture. I think I would say we like analogies today. You talked about the elephant awakening. I can also add a plane about to take off. So when you see someone trying to hold onto the plane that is about to take off, there will be some scene will be created. The policeman has to come and clear that off and so on. So I urge our partners, and I urge the Ethiopian public to look at the broader picture. In Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government is staying on course. We would stay on course. We will not be deterred with these minor issues that happen here and there, because we see the larger picture. And look how far we have come. In terms of peace and security, for instance, which is an agenda that often comes up, yes, we have had enough skirmishes here and there, but I think the worst days are behind us. The public has understood what it means to maintain peace. Even our brothers who went on the wrong track are now realizing, as we speak today. Just yesterday we've heard one big function from the Shane group has signed a peace agreement with the Oromia regional state. It's a powerful thing, you know. And I think it's like a domino effect. Others would come through, would ensure a sustainable peace in Ethiopia, and stay on course to answer, to respond to that generational aspiration of achieving a country in peace with itself, but also a beacon of hope for its neighbors, the continent, and the world alike. So my message is, we are staying on course, and please look at the broader picture, understand where we're heading, and don't focus on small incidents here and there, because the larger story, the larger picture is Ethiopia is about to take off. And those who try to hold on to that plane would probably fall down to their demise, but Ethiopia will take off.
Thank you, Dr. Eyob.
Thank you.
What are you hopeful with the new trajectory that Ethiopia is on? What are you most hopeful about?
Through the national dialogue process, through the transitional justice process, and also through DDR process, a new generation of Ethiopians who have reached a degree of consensus on what being Ethiopian means, what kind of Ethiopia we want to see, state institutions that are very capable, that have a robust legitimacy, a social contract that will last us for the next 200 years. I hope that we are in the process of building these things.